Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, I'm in Zurich with best-selling author and retail visionary Martin Lindstrom, talking about his latest book, The Ministry of Common Sense, How to Eliminate Bureaucratic Red Tape, Bad Excuses, and Corporate BS. We talk in depth in a wide-ranging conversation how the systems and technologies designed to free us continue to vex us with unintended consequences and what to do about it.
Regret to inform you that all cabin service has been completely suspended on this entire flight. If you intend to use the lavatories that have been closed down, you can, however, use the last lavatory in the very back of the plane. So here I am. There was 52 or 51 rows on this plane, and I was literally walking down there, lining up in a line similar to TSA in the airport, right? And then I could breathe in this freshly brewed smell of toilet mixed up with a faint aroma of COVID.
So seats in upright position, strap yourself in, and let's listen now to my interview. Martin, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I am fantastic. Good to meet you, Michael.
Well, thanks so much for joining me. Whereabouts are you joining me from?
I'm in Zurich, in Switzerland, and it's snowing outside. It's romantic, and we are under lockdown. So what more could you ask for?
Well, you're on the other kind of side of the world, but we're in the exact same position. I'm in Toronto, Canada, and it's snowy. It's beautiful out, but yeah, we're locked down too. So, jeez, what a world, man!
Day 265. Okay,
it's like that new Songbird movie. Have you seen trailers for that? It's a new Michael Mann movie. It's like COVID 23 or something variant. Like, do you really need to release a movie that raises our anxiety again? But, anyway.
Well, it's fascinating you asking about anxiety because one of the studies we've done has been into the area in our brain called the amygdala, which is the fear spot. One of the things I've noticed is that fear is accumulating. It means that if you are exposed for fear through movies, for politics, in the news, all that stuff, it actually accumulates in your brain and it never really goes down again. It just stays up there. So I would claim that the fear level you and I are exposed for today is substantially higher than it was 10 years ago, even though we are fairly safe. So what happens is that when a COVID 23 or 24, whatever comes out in Africa somewhere, we will immediately go to the alert levels. And it actually means that we will be much less receptible for change. We actually will retract back to our homes and stay there.
Interesting. I mean, in some ways, as I watch the economy, I get two comments on that. I briefed the Bank of Canada for on behalf of the retail industry, and I get invited to some great interviews, and they put a report with some charts that showed the first lockdown in March and the economic response, and then the economic response of this second lockdown, and the economy did much better on the whole. Their conclusion was that we've gotten used to it in a bizarre way of working and operating and reflecting, and so it's almost like we become a little numb to it in one way as an overall economy. And the second really interesting insight, I have a podcast partner in Atlantic Canada. Our Atlantic province has created a bubble within Canada. We call it the Atlantic bubble. So they almost have they're like a little bit of New Zealand in Canada, right? But the fear level, when you look at the research, the fear of the people living in the bubble is higher than the fear of the people living outside the bubble. So the fear of the virus, even though it's not there, is higher than us where it is prevalent. So it's just fascinating stuff, right?
What you're telling me is probably not surprising when you look to Australia as well. You will notice if you go to Sydney now, which is 5.5 million people living there, that is nearly empty, even though they have one case in whole Australia, right? So I think you're right. I do think that fear changes our behavior and it's amplifying things. And certainly when I talk to people in Australia and New Zealand and Taiwan, where they basically are free of COVID, they're all saying that they're afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of if they'll be locked back in again. And that fear actually dominates their day-to-day behavior.
Interesting. It's like a free-floating anxiety, almost. You and I might call it in the before time, pre-COVID. We just have free-floating anxiety. I don't know what to be afraid of, but there's enough going on that I'm just afraid of something at any given time. Well, listen, we've kind of jumped right in. It's fantastic. Let's take a quick step back. Tell us about yourself. Tell the listeners about yourself, your personal journey, what you do, and what you do when you're not writing best-selling books.
Well, I certainly didn't dream of writing best-selling books when I was 12 years old. But what I was dreaming of when I was 12 years old was to have my own Legoland. Go and get that, Michael, right? Mm-hmm. And I was serious. I actually got a sponsorship from Sony back then. God knows how I persuaded them. And they flew me to Japan to learn how to cut bonsai trees. And then I created this wonderful Legoland. It took me a year with canals and greeneries and, of course, a lot of Lego houses. And I opened the doors to this brand new Legoland. And two people showed up. My mom and my dad, which really was the lowest point of my career. So I went into panic. I went down to the local print office and I persuaded the owner to sponsor me. And he was a very nice person, so he said, absolutely. So 2 days later, there was an ad in the paper promoting my Legoland. $1 tickets were for sale. And I had 132 visitors showing up. There's just one problem. Visitor number 130 and visitor number 131 were the lawyers from Lego suing me.
Uh-oh.
And that was really, once again, I had a hit back here, pushback. So the Lego owner, the second generation, heard about it, and he went from his headquarters. I'm born in Denmark. This is a Danish story. Lego is Danish. So he drew the whole way to my mom and dad's home. And it was a little bit like Willy Wonka chocolate factory type of scenario we're talking about here, right? So he arrives and I
knocks
see
on
God.
The door. Who are you? Who are you again? You're who?
Yeah, exactly. And God is waiting there on the front porch, right, with a box of Legos. And he had a really nice proposition to me. He said, listen, we don't want to sue you, but we want to employ you. So I was the youngest kid in history of Lego, getting a job at Lego at the age of 12.
Wow. That's an interesting start to your life. How do you cap that? Well, you seem to have.
I learned from it later on. I asked the folks at Lego some years later, why did you employ me? And they said to me, well, it probably was because we wanted to employ our own audience to understand how they're thinking. We were losing contact with our customers. And by you being our target group, working on the inside, you helped us to drive that innovation. And I think it stayed with me ever since, because a lot of my work today is all about empathy, to place yourself in the shoes of another person and see the world or feel the world from another person's point of view. And it was actually first when, I think many years later, I was invited to Sweden to visit the owner and the back then late CEO, Ingvar Kamprad, so the owner of IKEA. And I'll never forget it. I went to his office and he was not there. So I said, where is he? He said, well, it's down at his usual place. Where is that? Well, down at the cash register. Sure enough, I went down to the cash register. And there he was already back then, this old man checking every customer out. And I said to him during the break, why do you do this? And he said to me, because I want to feel what people are seeing and I want to hear what people are thinking. And that's the reason why we are what we are today. That's the reason why IKEA is what it's become. And that really, I think, once again, shaped my Lego experience and shaped not only the way I write books today, where I do an extraordinary amount of inside work, visiting consumer homes across the world. More than 3,000 homes I lived in over the last 2 decades in 88 countries. But I also tend to ask a question about empathy, seeing the world from a different point of view when I'm transforming supermarkets or retail chains or whatever I do, because we quite often become very narrow. We see the world from inside out rather than outside in.
Well, your Lego story reminds me of that Tom Hanks movie, Big.
Yeah, exactly.
You remember the plot, right? And he's sitting around the boardroom table. It's one of my favorite scenes. I actually, use it as a touchstone when I'm talking about how do we get a better consumer view, where he sits there and the little kid, and he just, I don't get it. and the executive thinks he's being smart, but he's like, I don't get it. That's not fun. It's not like he brings in that sense of the consumer right in. And your book is just refit with so many examples of that. When you write a book, tell me about your tradecraft. I've talked to a lot of authors. I remember I was talking to Dan Pink, a great author, and he's got a process, and Roger Martin, he's got a different process. When you sit down to write a book, I'm always curious, what do? Do you knock out a first draft? Do you lock yourself in a room and have a word count every day? Or how does it come out of these books? How does this book come together for you?
Well, first of all, I don't sit down. And I'll tell you in 5 minutes from now why I don't sit down.
Right.
My story really began a couple of years ago when I realized I think I was spending time with Malcolm Gladwell, a fellow Canadian guy for you guys, in Zambia. And we were talking a lot about observations. And during that conversation, I realized that I started to lose my sense of creativity. So after that conversation, I skipped my phone. And I haven't had a smartphone or a phone ever since.
Wow.
And what I realized through this whole process was three things. I realized, first of all, you don't see anything when you have a phone. You're standing in a bar, you're waiting for someone. What's the first thing you do? You grab your phone and you do anything with the phone, anything so you don't look like a complete loser, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing. Yeah. The second thing is you don't see details. When you see something important, you grab your phone and you see it through a screen. Your first newborn baby walking, well, you saw it through a computer chip, right? The third thing is probably the worst. That is, we never get bored anymore. And boredom is the foundation for creativity. Is that pause, which we don't really have anymore. Think about it. We sit in back-to-back Zooms and team calls. There is no breaks anymore. So I realized through that process that I needed to get more bored. So I skipped the phone, which had been an amazing experience. But I also realized that when I started to map down my creativity levels, and there was a very distinct pattern going on. And it really was not just when I was bored, but also when I was swimming. I call it the water moment. And you could call it a sense of meditation, I guess. But in the end of the day, when you're free floating, I think it generates releases another type of chemicals in your brain. And that leads me back to the answer to your question. I don't sit down, I jump into the pool. And I have this sounds really bad, I know, but I literally have a pen and a paper in each end of the pool, and then I do my laps. And I write keywords down on a piece of paper, which is reminding about the narrative. So all my last couple of books have actually been produced in the pool, and I take these wet sucking notes and I hang them on a string. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? No, it's okay. Everyone listening now, you're welcome to shut this down, because why am I wasting my time listening to that guy, right?
Well, it's let's just say it's not the response I thought I was going to get. Let's just put it that way.
And then I'm sitting with these, and sometimes some of the papers are glued together because the water is a bit sort of, and sometimes I can't really read what I was writing, but that really becomes it's almost like small dots, when you connect these dots and it becomes a house. Well, for me, it becomes a book. And that's really my writing process. Because what it does, it helps me to be creative and see things from different perspectives. So it's not turning into a linear way of thinking. And I do very much like a counterintuitive writing format, and also a very light writing format where you smile and laugh a lot, because I do think that the world is so incredibly serious now that we need to laugh, and we need to join a journey where this is not a business book, but where it's almost like a novel. So that's my approach.
Well, it's a good segue. Let's talk about the book, The Ministry of Common Sense: How to Eliminate Bureaucratic Red Tape, Bad Excuses, and Corporate Bull. I can't read the rest of it; it's kind of covered up.
Well, let me just talk about that bull. You can't read, right? Because do you know that in fact this book has been banned by Amazon? Or let me just rephrase it. It's banned for advertising. You can still buy the book on Amazon, but you can't advertise because it's still BULLS, right? And the algorithms on Amazon.
It's the book. Did you design that to happen? Like, it's got to be Come on, you knew that going in.
No, I did not.
It basically is the book in a nutshell, right?
It is the book in a nutshell. I mean, if I would have stopped everything, I would have spelled out the entire word, right? But I just thought BS. So an algorithm in Amazon is banning the two letters combined, saying BS, and also bulls, right? But what's even more ironic is you can go to Amazon and see my book with a full spell out of the word. The whole word is there, but you can't advertise that word. Not sure how that works. And that is the reason why, in hindsight, I wrote the book, because this is really frustrating, if you get what I mean.
Well, and the book is really all about how these bureaucratic processes get in the way of basically common sense. And what struck me as I read it, and I have this experience in I do some advocacy and lobbying work, and often we say that when we meet with the politicians and civil servants, we articulate the unintended consequences. Like, if you do this, you may not think it's going to do that. And have we reached a point in the world where things are so complex? And you give lots of examples of algorithms that do this. You're living one in Amazon. It exists for a purpose, but the unintended consequences of that specific purpose are just massive. And these things, they didn't mean for them to happen, but the cumulative effect is that they're happening everywhere. Is that an essence of what you're trying to get to?
I think it's spot on. I think there's a study done in Australia which is called the Safety Clutter Study. And the study really talks about how up to 65% of the rules and regulations and guidelines really have been designed for the sake of the person developing them to justify his or her own job. And I tried it the other day. I was jumping on a plane, and as I took a
plane, what's that? So,
it's one of these with wings on. Yeah. It's wings.
What is this you speak of?
I don't know what it is. And TSA, that's my dream. So, so I was sitting on this plane, and there was this announcement going on. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on board on this plane. I regret to inform you that all cabin service has been completely suspended on this entire flight. If you intend to use the lavatories that have been closed down, you can, however, use the last lavatory in the very back of the plane. The front lavatories are exclusively reserved for the cabin crew. So here I am. There was 52 or 51 rows on this plane, and I was literally walking down there, lining up in a line similar to TSA in the airport, right? And then I could breathe in this freshly brewed smell of toilet mixed up with a faint aroma of COVID, right? And then I took a seat in my 2A or whatever I was sitting at, and this new format of entertainment has now been installed in planes, which I think is remarkable how big and how quick they've been on innovating entertainment systems. This system is actually an extension of a system you have seen in the past, which is called the landing form.
We'll be back in a minute. If you like this interview, hit subscribe and catch up on the Voice of Retail episodes you might have missed, like my exclusive interview with Lauren Chan, founder and CEO of Henning, and you'll get new episodes delivered directly to you. More with Martin Lindstrom after the break. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the need for businesses to undergo a digital transformation. Through the Toronto's Regional Board of Trade's Recovery Activation Program, otherwise known as RAP, you can now immerse yourself in online sessions, workshops, and one-on-one mentorships with industry experts to learn how your businesses can get ahead through digital solutions. Whether your business is having difficulty connecting with customers or struggling to manage increasing demand, RAP offers practical support and advice at no cost, helping your business build back stronger and smarter. Wondering how you can get started? Well, your business's RAP journey begins with Digital Needs Assessment, or a DNA. The DNA takes less than 30 minutes to complete and offers an assessment of your business's current digital maturity, benchmarked against companies of similar size from related sectors from around the country. Based on your results, RAP's team of industry experts will contact you to discuss which programs will be most useful in helping you take the next step in your digital transformation. From helping you build your personalized digital transformation blueprint to tailored and outcome-driven modules based on cybersecurity and digital marketing tools, there's a RAP program to support you and your business. In under a year, RAP will have analyzed more than 1,000 Ontario businesses, hosted more than 4,000 virtual event attendees, and maintained 100% overall participation satisfaction. Remember, there's no cost to participate. So to ensure your business is ready to capitalize on those exciting opportunities for digital growth, take your digital needs assessment today at wrap.bot.com. That's wrap.bot.com.
You know, when you fill out these landing forms with all sorts of stupid questions, for example, one of them is when you land in the United States is, have you been a terrorist? Right. And of course,
do you self-identify as a terrorist is kind of almost...
Exactly. No, well, I actually have been pregnant more than 60 times, I'll say, because when I get a massage in an airport or somewhere, they always have these forms asking if you've been pregnant. And I always tick it just to see if anyone... and no one really. But so I'm sitting there with this entertainment form, which is now a new version. And the new version is kind of interesting. And the first question is, have you been in close proximity with anyone you don't know over the last 12 hours? And the only thing you have to do is to look to your right and get her name and her phone number with the excuse of a landing form, right? And then the second question is, and this is even worse, you know, you don't have a pen anymore because we all have these smartphones except me. So we don't wear, why should we wear a pen? So a genius in front row, he's asking this person if you could borrow a pen. And of course, everyone else want to borrow that pen. So when it lands at the last passenger, the question is, have you touched anything anyone has touched over the last 12 hours? And you could just tick the yes straight away. So this is the common sense we're talking about. And that comes back to the safety clutter and you're articulating unintended consequences conversation that, yes, this has become a life in its own. We are cluttering up our life and our behavior with forms, regulations, compliance, guidelines, all that stuff, which we don't question anymore because it's a bit like if you want to kill a frog, you know the story, you can put it into
boiling water, a little bit at a time.
And it's a little bit like it's just slowly heating. And one day we wake up and you say to yourself, am I just stupid? Yeah, it's probably me. Particularly when you fill in these 16-digit passwords now with 2 uppercase, 5 lowercase, 5 symbols, 6 numeric things. Yeah. And of course, you can't use the password you used last time because that's now being taken already. And any name or anything you can remember is, of course, rejected. So you write down this whole thing on a Post-it note and paste it next to your screen. I mean, you blame yourself today. But the reality is, stop it. Let's change it and look at the world from outside in, a little bit like what I learned back when I was 12 years of age at Lego, right?
Well, and one of the solutions you give to this, you know, as we kind of get to the second half is how do we get past all this? How do we resolve this cumulative effect? But you talk about this interesting idea, I called it the chicken feed solution. I don't think you call it quite that. But basically, you know, it's a metaphor or an example of how people are trapped in one way of working but can get out. So tell us about that.
Well, absolutely. So an experiment was done some years ago where chickens were put into a cage and they're stuck there for half a year. And one day they're let out on the beautiful green grass and the sun was shining and the birds were singing and the chickens went out. And after 30 seconds, they turned around and went straight back in again. And I call that the chicken cage syndrome. And really it's the idea of that we are afraid of the unknown. And one of the things I've realized working a lot with retail over the years is that retail in particular is held back by the chicken cage syndrome. I mean, one of the things I always tend to say to retailers is that they're driven by the cash register ringing every night. And if it doesn't ring, you can be pretty sure the strategy you had the day before would be thrown in the air and you will redo everything. So when you want to do transformation in the retail sector in particular, what I've learned is this, that you have to understand the psychology of with no intent here, but about chickens. So how do you get chickens out of a chicken cage? Well, what experiments show is that if you imagine you have 4 cages standing around a square, all pointing towards this square, and now where would you place this piece of corn? most people would probably place it in the center with an equal distance to every cage, right? But the problem is that there's a heck of a distance to that center corn there, right? And so the chicken would be standing there and first ask itself, my God, this is far away. My KPIs are not really supporting this long distance. I'm not really, there's no bonus here. And the second thing will be, if I go this distance, if I go into this unknown and my manager is fired, look at me, what a fool I'm going to be like. So what is the chicken doing? The chicken is now going to look at the other cage over there on that square, and that chicken is looking back at you, look at me, look at you, look at me, look at you, and then it's ending up concluding by, well, listen, that's not going to pick it. I'm certainly not going to take that one. Are you? And it's looking at the third and the fourth, and no one is going to do it. So they go straight back into the chicken cage. Right. And when I use this metaphor, of course, what I'm saying is that we are like tribes. Retail is in particular like tribes, and it's tribes at multiple layers. It is the industry by itself, which is a tribe, to see how difficult it is for you to release yourself from your stretch jacket, as I say. I mean, just a circular. Let's take the circular for a second, right? The circular has been around for how many years? 50 years? 60 years?
Yeah.
And the circular it doesn't give any meaning at all. No one is reading it. Well, I know around 3 or 4% is reading it because they have these coupons that are cutting out. But the reality is people are not reading them. But it still happens. And I've been trying to kill the circular for 6 years in one of the supermarkets in the US. And it took me 6 years. And here's the issue. The issue is, as all of you guys listening know, that the circular is tied up with a kickback, with the vendor funding. And because the fast mover consumer goods players, CPGs, they have no other way of wrapping up or justifying a spend of marketing. They attach it to this advertising, which doesn't work, but at least there's an ad which we can hang on the wall. So suddenly it's locked in. And not only that, another way the supermarkets in particular are locked in is, of course, the buying functions. One of the things I realized when we worked with a mid-sized supermarket chain in the US called Lowe's Food was that the buying functions do not support adjacencies. Meaning that if I go in and I buy a steak, and then I want to have salt and pepper and spices to it, and then I want to have a sauce, and then I want to have
buyer. Yeah, it's a different buyer, different category.
So the whole exactly. So the whole first floor is not mirroring what's downstairs. So we had to reshuffle all that to create adjacencies in it. So it is one brick wall after another stuck in an old system, which is further cemented by all these independent parties which are locking each other in, back to the chicken cage where you have these cages and these chickens looking at each other. No one actually want to take the first step. And of course, when a chicken then is taking the first step, everyone is saying, well, I thought so. No, I knew it. But so what I have learned from transformation of retail is to place the corn straight outside the chicken cage. And I call that a 90-day intervention. And really it builds into the mentality of retail, which is this instant reaction that retailers are incredibly fast at changing things on the floor. And it never stays that way. It stays that way if you really earn a lot of money straight away, but it rarely happens. So it sort of kind of fade back to the default behavior. But if you do a 90-day intervention where you find one little thing you can change, and you immediately after 90 days can implement it and see a financial return or an increase in NPS or whatever it may be, then you will realize that you're breaking down that immune system, that defense mechanism for change. And then you place another corn and another corn and another corn, and suddenly you actually have done the transformation. And I think that
incremental step by step. Let me ask you this: is retailers of all formats, including grocery, have gone through a 9-month intervention, a 9-month crisis, yeah. COVID. Now, COVID has done more in some ways for the retail to shake up the retail industry in some ways than anything we've ever seen before. This big circuit breaker of consumer behavior. I have a podcast with Steve Dennis, another author from a great book, Remarkable Retail. And we often talk on the podcast about why it takes a crisis for retailers to change and innovate. And we were talking about the curbside example. You know, curbside is suddenly, it's impossible. We can't do it. It's awkward. Don't like it. And then in 2 weeks it was done. And so is, the kernel, has this experience fundamentally upended your thinking in any way that retailers, in the grocery sector, have been a big beneficiary of the collapse of restaurants and food service in the short term. So the volumes are there. So the volumes, cover some sins, so to speak. But in many formats, the retailers I talk to, they're making decisions now they never dreamed of making and taking risks. And, you must experience as well, this idea that it's got to be perfect. And, perfect being sometimes the enemy of good and innovation. What's been your experience talking to your clients and as you've been observing during this COVID era?
Well, first of all, I think my answer to you is yes and no, because there's no doubt about that this intervention called COVID-19 has made a lot of retailers wake up because they had no other choice. So what has happened, I would say, is first of all, the local has come back big way. We also have noticed that the shopping behaviors, the patterns has changed a lot. I would argue that if you go to the rural areas, you will notice that people are buying products as they did 50 years back in time. Certainly when I interview the independent groceries around that topic, baking powder, whatever it is where you are using craftsmanship. So I think what has happened is that they got their shine back. But if you look at the conventional retailer store, what is it they've innovated per se? They got a boost for sure, no doubt about that. They've beaten the big players in particular, I would say, but they haven't really reinvented the model per se, right? So yes, they've certainly stepped up. They were the first to clean the stores. They were the first to get the product on the shelf ahead of everyone else. Typically, they even got better meat on the shelf because they had better contacts to the local farmers, and so suddenly they actually, were justifying why local really should be local. But what has not changed is this. When COVID-19 is over and COVID-22 is coming back, that's a joke, right? But when the COVID-19 once for all is over,
quiet period between the variants,
well, whenever it perhaps is over, then what is going to happen is that some customers, some guests, as I call them, will stay with this new retail format and some won't. What we have seen is, if I look at the behaviors and the patterns, is first of all, the frequency has gone down a lot. People are buying much more volume per visit.
Bigger baskets, spend more. They're, less browsing, right? Less impulse, all those things, right?
Absolutely, all that stuff. But what we also have seen is that people are selecting the stores based on what is inspiring them the most, the biggest source of inspiration. And this is interesting because if you go into, no intent here, but Lidl or any of those stores where the level of inspiration probably is not a home run, then
the hard discounters, as we would call them, right? They really focus on value and not experience, so to speak, right?
It's difficult to be inspired by a cardboard box. When you go into those stores, then it becomes just a click and run format as you could have done from home. But when you go into a place where, you've been staying at home for a long time, you're looking at the same wall. Mom, what are we going to have tonight? Is it the same as yesterday and yesterday, right? So what is happening is that house mothers, and just don't forget that they're still in the majority in terms of people buying stuff, then I would claim that they need inspiration. That's what we see from the numbers. And inspiration comes back to three things in the retail, in the supermarket in particular. It comes back to you being incredibly good at adjacencies, combining products and SKUs in ways where it inspires me.
Build a basket, right? Help build a basket.
It helps build the basket. But there's another thing which is interesting. A lot of retailers are telling me, well, we don't have enough SKUs. We need to increase the SKUs. That's BS. Working with McDonald's many years ago, I learned that quite often people, when they go into a fast food restaurant, always buy the same and the same. And it was actually the biggest problem for McDonald's for many years because people got tired of that Big Mac or whatever, even though they had perhaps 50 other SKUs. So people go into a habit. So using that as a metaphor here, that the idea is not for you to have many SKUs on the shelf. It is to combine them and inspire people to see them in a context where they become alive, where you're actually using the product. It's not just sampling I'm talking about here, but it's where you combine products and things in an interesting way. And that's the second thing. So one is, of course, to tell the story, and another one is adjacency, and the third one is, of course, to explore things and using the sensory aspect. And then once you have the center aspect, the storytelling, the inspiration part, then it's also to show that you are not a robot when you come in here. We actually care about you. So the people part here, the culture part. Those three factors, in whatever shape or format they can take, are really the lifeblood for retailers in the future. They cannot compete on volume and they cannot compete on price. Online will always win, but they can compete on emotions and moments. So whenever we have created new store concepts, which I have to say over the years has been extraordinarily successful, it came back to creating experiences which were designed around people taking as many selfies and photos as they could in the store, and really making
Instagrammable merchandising kind of idea, right? I mean, and you mentioned Lowe's, which is a fantastic grocer in the US. I know Lowe's well.
I'll give you a story about Lowe's. When Lowe's were, I wouldn't say it was near bankruptcy, but I'll certainly say that was struggling a big way, and they wanted to back out of the industry. And when the owner contacted me 8 years ago, then what we realized was two things doing ethnographic visits in the local areas across the US. We realized one thing, which is the local population had lost the local community. The churches were closing down, the local community center was closing down, schools were closing down. So we needed to replicate a community feeling. And the second thing we, by the way, learned was that we have two ages. We have what I call my real age, my physical age, and then we have what I call my twin age, which is my inner age. And quite often we feel much younger on the inside.
Right.
And that was a very interesting insight, because we then learned we should design the supermarket to a younger spirit. No one want to be seen as being old. So we created this crazy design. And one of the things we designed in the store, we did a lot of things, but I'll tell you about two actually. One was pick and prep. And pick and prep was where we said, why don't we inspire people to use the fruit and vegetables in a different way? So basically, you will come up with all the fruit and vegetables you bought. You'll hand it over, and for $4.99, I think, they will cut and slice it and prepare it for you. And if you bought this huge watermelon, you only need a half, they will fix that. And we actually had a training team in Japan learning from ninjas to how to cut and get the most value out of the fruit. And we developed this concept, and it is still today mind-blowing. I don't want to put numbers on it, but I can tell you any number you have in your mind, double it. So that was the first concept where we suddenly created an experience where it had ninjas cutting the food, and it was very engaging. Another concept we developed was crazy. And the concept was based on our work in neuroscience. I do a lot of work in neuroscience. And one of a guy called Antonio Damascus, he developed a philosophy called a somatic marker. A somatic marker is the idea of creating something so dramatic you'll never forget it. It's called an emotional bookmark in your brain. 9/11 is a somatic marker, and not a negative one, right? We all remember where we were and who we were together with, but you can't remember what you had for lunch at your birthday, right? So that's different. Right. So we said we wanted to create a somatic marker in the store to make people wake up when they come inside and not see things either through their phones or through a filter, but actually say, my gosh, this is a new Lowe's. So we decided to own chicken. And we said, this is the one thing we want to be different at. And I'll be frank with you, the chickens were not that much better. They were perhaps 5% better, right? But not a lot, but we wanted to own it. So we developed a chicken chandelier. And I'm not sure if you've seen a chicken chandelier before. I haven't. It is a chandelier converted into a chicken, or a chicken into a chandelier. And you hang it in the ceiling, and literally all the staff will, with a ding on a bell, congregate underneath this chicken chandelier and do the chicken dance while there's music played out in the entire speaker in the whole store. And I don't need to tell you, suddenly you have 20 staff dancing with masks under a chicken chandelier. And of course, all guests or customers are looking at this and wondering what went wrong here.
Stopped in the tracks. What is going on over there?
And then the phones come up and there is filming. And little Pete, he's only 5 years old, is now doing the chicken dance for the first time. And he wants the chicken, by the way. And suddenly this just took off. And what we did was to create an experience inside a supermarket where you wanted to go.
It's a wonderful example. It's like, it reminds me of Pike's Place in Seattle, right, where they throw the fish across the room. Just something to break. It's like it's like breaking the monotony of whatever you're doing, shopping or whatever it is you're doing. It's just such a fascinating discussion. I mean, as you think about, as you kind of wrap up a little bit, advice to the retailers in terms of just, when I reflect on the book, we all know these things that have been built, structures that have been built, and processes that have been built. They have unintended consequences. What's the kind of 3 best pieces of advice to start today to kind of beat back uncommon sense and to start this ministry of common sense, as you call it? Give me 3 pieces of advice for the retailers listening.
The first thing for you is to see the world from outside in, not from inside out. And by that I mean, start to spend time with your customers. Take the store managers out of your store when they have a minute. And I know they're very busy, and I know they'll come with a lot of arguments for why they shouldn't do it. Believe me, I've been there with thousands of store managers. But once I take them into a home of a consumer and we open the cabinets and we open the pantry and we open the fridge and we talk with the housewife or whoever it is in that home, we open their cookbooks, we go to the smartphone and look at Instagram, then what we realize is another world going on there. And it's almost like the store managers have this aha moment. They realize why people are buying what they do and why they buy what they're not doing. I mean, you see these contrasts. So that's the first thing I'll do, because then you can redesign the store around it. The second thing I would do if I was you right now is I would take the entire team outside the store and I'll stay outside for 7 minutes, and then I'll blindfold everyone. Okay. And then I'll walk with the first guy guarding everyone else, walk inside the store, everyone holding each other on their shoulders, if you're allowed to do that with the COVID rules. And as you walk inside, you will notice that there's a very different smell in that store. And that smell is not very pleasant. The first thing you're likely to smell is the ice cube machine in the entrance, where the water hasn't been exchanged for a long time. You will pass by the fish department where, yes, I know they clean the ice every day, but they forget to flush the water through the pipes in the lock on Sundays. So there it's rotten, and the smell goes into the bakery where it smells of rotten fish now. So what I'm saying is you will suddenly see the world through your nose. And a retail is all about our 5 senses: what we see, what we touch, taste, sound, and what we hear. And I think the issue is a lot of retailers have forgotten about that. So point one is to go into the consumer homes. Number 2 is to go through your store blindfolded. And I think I can give you 700 pieces of advice, but I'll take a random one. There's a lot of things. The number 3 would be kind of fun. There's a lot of silo mentalities, in particular in headquarters of retail chains. It's super dangerous because consumers don't see silos when they walk down the floor, but the silos for sure is happening up there. That's back to the adjacency we talked about. And quite often you will see that common sense is defined by 2 words. It's the word common and sense. And common is, guess what? To see the world from another person's point of view, which is empathy. So empathy and common sense is very linked together. And it's actually a topic I'm writing a lot about in the book, because what we think is the issue is lack of common sense. But the true issue is actually lack of empathy. So what I would do is to infuse empathy into your retail store. And what I would do is, for example, to skip the Friday afternoon beer. And instead, if you have that going on now, I would replace it with a campfire. Now, let me explain. So all studies are showing, using neuroscience, that when we're sitting in front of this campfire, it is a very unique experience. It's a sense of belonging. You're saying the truth. It's a moment where you feel sort of unique, all that stuff. And we actually know today there's a special neurotransmitter released in our brain, giving us a sense of pride and sense of belonging. Now, I would replicate that. In fact, we've done that in Lowe's, among others, where people are replacing the afternoon beer with shutting down the light in the office space. And people are sitting in a circle. They are having a torch light in the middle, and then the projector's projecting a campfire video on a screen, and you have this crackling sound coming out of the speakers. And then people tell the truth. They tell about the challenges they had last week, the frustrations they have, the stupidities going on there, all that stuff. And the managers are sitting with him. And as you're sitting there in the dark, it becomes kind of, you start to trust each other. There's that pause we talked about early on. What's is happening here? And when you switch on the lights, you actually made a decision. We need that because today the world has become too rational. You're not creative when you're on Zoom. You're not pausing. But that moment is what can bring back the creative level where you jump out of that back-to-back routine we have in retail. We don't have a time to stop up and think and ask yourself, what is going to happen after COVID-19? How do I recover or retain those guests coming into my store so they're not just disappearing back to the good old days and I've lost an opportunity?
Well, the book is The Ministry of Common Sense. Martin, you've been such a treat to speak with. It's such a pile of fun. There's lots more to read in the book, and you really stitch it together well. It's not your first book, clearly. Lots of an entire great library of insights, and I really wanted to thank you for joining me on The Voice of Retail, sharing some of your insights, and I'll put links to where folks can pick up the book and really cherish it as a really handy guide to help us during COVID, post-COVID, and for the rest of our careers. So, Martin, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating and review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of LeBlanc Company Inc. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Visit my website at meleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe and have a great week.